It was supposed to be a quick trip home, 4 days, tops. I hadn't been back to my hometown in almost a year, and if I'm being honest, I wasn't exactly dying to return. The only reason I agreed was because my mom guilt-tripped me into coming for her birthday. So I packed a bag, booked the cheapest flight I could find, and landed back in the sleepy suburb I thought I'd left behind for good. I didn't expect to see him again. Tyler. He used to live across the street when we were kids. We weren't best friends or anything, but we hung out enough, playing basketball in his driveway, riding bikes to the corner store, that kind of thing. He was the loud one, the joker, always getting into trouble. I was quieter, more into books and keeping to myself. Still, somehow we always found each other during long summers and after-school boredom. He moved away junior year. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. I remember noticing his house was suddenly empty, the for sale sign staked into the lawn, like a period at the end of a sentence. That was 10 years ago. So when I pulled into my parents' driveway and saw someone across the street unloading a moving truck into that same house, I didn't think anything of it until I saw him. Same easy stride, same messy hair, same confident smirk like he was in on a joke no one else knew. I stood there, keys in hand, staring like an idiot. He spotted me. Shit, I muttered under my breath, half hoping he'd just wave and go back to what he was doing. But of course not. Tyler dropped the box he was carrying and crossed the street like no time had passed at all. "Eli?" he called out, halfway to my driveway. I nodded slowly, still caught off guard. "Yeah. Hey." "Damn, man," he said, now just a few feet away. "I thought that was you. You haven't changed a bit." "That's not true," I said, forcing a smile. "You back for good?" Tyler scratched the back of his neck, looking up at his old house. "Kinda. Just moved in yesterday, helping my mom get settled. She's retiring, so she wanted to come home. Figured I'd come with her for a bit, help her out." It was strange. He looked older, of course, broader shoulders, a hint of stubble, a little more tired around the eyes. But there was something familiar in the way he stood, like the past 10 years had folded into nothing. "You still live around here?" he asked. I shook my head. "Nah, just visiting. My mom's birthday." "Right, makes sense," he said, then hesitated. "You, want to come over later? I'm grilling. Burgers, beer, the works. Could be cool to catch up." I hadn't planned on seeing anyone while I was home. I was going to lay low, eat cake, and fly out first thing Monday. But before I could stop myself, I heard my voice say, "Yeah, that sounds good." And just like that, my weekend changed. I told myself I was only going over there for an hour. That was the lie I repeated while I showered, while I changed shirts twice for no real reason, while I cracked open a beer at my parents' kitchen counter trying to calm the weird knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't nerves exactly. More like anticipation mixed with something unresolved I hadn't known was still there. By the time I crossed the street, the sky had turned that deep blue purple that only shows up in early summer evenings. Tyler's mom's house looked the same from the outside, freshly painted but still unmistakably his place. Same porch, same wide driveway, same faint smell of charcoal drifting through the air. Tyler was already outside, standing by the grill in a sleeveless shirt, beer balanced on the ledge. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way that made my chest tighten for reasons I didn't immediately unpack. "Hey," he said, easy, like we hadn't gone a decade without speaking. "You made it." "Yeah," I replied, stepping onto the driveway. "Smells good. Burgers are almost done. Mom ran to the store. Said to tell you hi, by the way." I nodded, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. He'd filled out since high school. Not in a bulky way, just solid, comfortable in his body. The kind of guy who didn't need to try. We grabbed plates and sat on the back steps, the conversation starting light, where I lived now, what I did for work, the usual catching up stuff. Tyler listened more than he talked, which surprised me. He used to be incapable of staying quiet for more than 30 seconds, so he said after a moment, glancing sideways at me, "You ever come out?" The question landed gently, but it still made my heart skip. "Yeah," I said, after a beat. "Couple years ago. Wasn't a huge dramatic thing. Just happened. Tyler nodded slowly, chewing, eyes on the yard. Good. That was it. Just one word. But it felt loaded. What about you? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He shrugged. I dated girls. Still do, I guess. But I've been figuring things out. Something in his voice made me look at him more closely. There was no smirk, no teasing edge, just honesty, maybe even nerves. We sat there in silence for a while after that, the kind that doesn't feel awkward, just heavy with things neither of us was saying. Eventually, he stood and stretched. Want to see the house? Mom redid a bunch of it. I followed him inside, the familiar layout hitting me like déjà vu. Same hallway, same stairs, different furniture, different energy. His old room was now a guest room, stripped of personality. Mine's in the basement now, he said, heading down. More space, quieter. The basement was finished, surprisingly cozy. Low lights. A couch. Posters that hinted at his taste now. Music I recognized. Places I'd been. It felt intimate in a way the rest of the house didn't. We sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, beers between us, talking about nothing and everything. College. Mistakes. The weird pressure of expectations when you're a teenager who doesn't quite fit. I used to think about you, Tyler said suddenly, staring at his hands. After I moved, my breath caught. Yeah? Yeah. Not in a creepy way, he added quickly, laughing under his breath. Just wondered what you were up to. You were always different. I liked that. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. He looked at me then. Really looked at me, and something shifted again. Closer this time. More dangerous. I'm glad you came tonight, he said quietly. So was I. Even though part of me knew this wasn't going to stay simple for long. I don't remember who leaned in first. That's the part that sticks with me the most. Not the kiss itself, not the way my heart tried to claw its way out of my chest, but the fact that there was no clear moment where one of us decided this is happening. It was like we both felt the gravity shift at the same time. Tyler was sitting closer now. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off him. His knee brushed mine when he shifted, and neither of us moved away. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in the quiet basement. You ever think about us? He asked, his voice low, careful. I swallowed. Back then? Yeah. I hesitated, then nodded. I didn't have the language for it at the time. Or the courage. But yeah, I did. Tyler let out a slow breath, like he'd been holding it for years. Same. That was when he finally looked at me fully, no guard, no joke to hide behind. His eyes searched my face, like he was asking a question without saying it out loud. I answered by leaning in. The kiss was tentative at first, soft, almost unsure, like we were both checking to make sure this was real. His lips were warm, slightly chapped, familiar in a way that didn't make sense given how long it had been. When he pulled back, just barely, his forehead rested against mine. Tell me if this is weird, he murmured. It's not, I said, immediately, too immediately. It really isn't. That was all he needed. The second kiss was different, hungrier. His hand came up to the side of my face, thumb brushing my jaw, and the touch sent a shiver straight down my spine. I leaned into it without thinking, years of restraint dissolving in an instant. We broke apart only when we had to breathe. Tyler laughed softly, shaking his head. Fuck, I did not expect this tonight. Me neither, I admitted. I thought I was just coming over for a burger. Worst excuse I've ever heard, he said, smiling. Then, more serious. You okay? I nodded. Yeah, are you? Yeah, he said. I just don't want to screw this up. That surprised me. This? Whatever this is, he said. Us. I've spent a lot of time pretending I didn't wonder about this. About you. And now that it's actually happening, I don't want it to be a one-night what if. My chest tightened. "I'm only here for a few days." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for promises, just honesty." I thought about that for a moment. About how easy it would be to downplay this, to say it was nostalgia or a fluke. But standing there, with his hand still resting on my knee, that felt like a lie. "I want this," I said finally, "even if it's complicated." Tyler smiled, slow and genuine, and leaned in again, this time resting his head against my shoulder. We stayed like that for a while, just breathing, just letting the moment settle. Eventually, footsteps sounded upstairs. His mom was home. Tyler groaned quietly. Timing's impeccable. I laughed under my breath. Guess that's my cue. He walked me to the door, our fingers brushing once, deliberately this time. On the porch, he hesitated, then kissed me again. Quick, but meaningful. "Come back tomorrow?" he asked. "Just us, no grill." I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, tomorrow." As I crossed the street back to my parents' house, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I hadn't just reopened an old chapter. I'd started something entirely new. I barely slept that night. Not because anything bad happened, nothing did, but because my brain refused to shut up. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the way Tyler had looked at me in that basement. The way his voice dropped when he admitted he'd thought about me too. The kiss that felt less like a beginning and more like something that had been waiting patiently for years. At some point, close to morning, I gave up and stared at the ceiling in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by old posters and shelves I hadn't touched in a decade. It felt surreal, like I'd stepped backward in time only to end up somewhere completely unfamiliar. When I finally drifted off, it was light outside. I woke up late to my mom knocking once and then letting herself in. Already talking. "You're sleeping in like a teenager again." Tyler's mom stopped by earlier, said he's back in town. Funny how that happens. My heart jumped. "Yeah, I ran into him yesterday." She smiled in that knowing mother way. "He asked about you." Of course he did. I spent the afternoon restless, pretending to be present during birthday preparations while checking the time every few minutes like an idiot. Tyler had said tomorrow, and somehow that word carried more weight than it should have. Around 7, my phone buzzed. "Tyler, you free?" I didn't even try to play it cool. "Me? Yeah." "Tyler, come over." Back door. I slipped on my shoes, mumbled something about getting fresh air, and left before my mom could ask questions. The street was quiet, cicadas buzzing in the warm evening air. Tyler's back door was already open, light spilling out onto the patio. He was waiting inside, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. Not guarded, just steady. When he saw me, his face softened in a way that made my chest ache. "Hey," he said. "Hey." For a moment, we just stood there, the silence charged but comfortable. Then Tyler stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. Not rushed. Not tentative. Just solid. I didn't realize how much I needed that until my arms were around him, his chin resting briefly against my shoulder. The closeness grounded me, quieted the noise in my head. "Come on," he said quietly, letting go but keeping a hand at my back. "Let's go downstairs." The basement felt different this time, less like a secret, more like a choice. We sat close immediately, no pretense about space. Tyler leaned back, stretching one arm along the couch behind me. Not touching, but inviting. After a beat, I leaned into him, my shoulder resting against his chest. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Yeah," I said, "just processing." "Same," he admitted. "I've been thinking all day." About how I spent so long assuming certain doors were closed," he said. "Turns out I just never tried the handle." I smiled despite myself. "That's one way to put it." He glanced down at me, expression thoughtful. "Can I kiss you again?" The fact that he asked, after last night, after everything, hit me harder than I expected. "Yeah," I said. "Please." This time, the kiss was slower, deeper, Less about discovery and more about confirmation. His hand found my waist, thumb brushing my side in a way that sent warmth curling low in my stomach. I tilted my head instinctively, fitting against him like it was always meant to be this way. When we pulled apart, we stayed close, foreheads touching. "This doesn't feel like a mistake," he murmured. "No," I agreed. "It really doesn't." We talked for hours after that, about his time away, about my life in the city, about the people we'd dated, the things that almost fit but never quite did. There was no pressure, no rush, just honesty unfolding naturally. At some point, Tyler admitted, "I don't know what this makes me. Labels and all that." I looked at him. "You don't have to know right now." He nodded, relieved. "Good. Because all I know is that I don't want to stop this." I didn't either. When I finally left that night, it was later than I planned, and my thoughts were quieter than they'd been in days. As I crossed the street, I realized something else had shifted. This wasn't just about revisiting the past. It was about deciding what we were brave enough to build next. By the third day, seeing Tyler felt less like a surprise and more like a routine I'd slipped into without noticing. That was the dangerous part. We didn't say it out loud, but we both started orbiting the same quiet moments. Morning texts that weren't urgent but felt necessary. A "you up?" That didn't mean closeness, just presence. Small updates about nothing. What he fixed around the house, what I was helping my mom with. Like we were already threaded into each other's days. That afternoon, my parents went out to run errands, and I found myself pacing the living room, restless again. I checked my phone, then checked it again, pretending I wasn't hoping for his name to light up the screen. It did. "Tyler. House is empty. Want to come over?" I didn't bother asking what he meant by that. I already knew. This time, when I walked in through the back door, he didn't wait. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides and kissed me like he'd been holding back all day. No hesitation, no question. I kissed him back just as hard, fingers curling into his shirt, grounding myself in the fact that this was real, that he was really here. He backed me gently against the counter, not trapping me, just closing the space between us until I could feel his breath hitch when I pulled him closer. "Still okay?" he asked even then. "Yes," I said, breathless. "God, yes." We ended up on the couch, downstairs again, but this time there was no pretending, it was just conversation that brought us there. Everything felt deliberate now. His hand slid along my thigh, slow enough that I could stop him if I wanted to, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned in and whispered, "You can touch me." The way he froze for half a second told me how much that permission meant. When he moved again, it was careful but confident, like he was learning the language of my body one word at a time. Every touch asked a question, every reaction answered it. There was no rush, no urgency to get somewhere specific, just the shared understanding that this moment mattered. At one point I laughed softly, overwhelmed in the best way. "You're really thinking about this." Tyler smiled against my neck. "I want to get it right." "You are," I said honestly. What struck me most wasn't the physical closeness. It was the trust underneath it. The way he stayed present. The way he checked in with his eyes before his hands. The way it felt less like crossing a line and more like stepping into alignment. When we finally slowed, limbs tangled, his arm heavy around my shoulders, the quiet felt earned. "I should probably tell you something," he said after a while, voice low. I shifted slightly to look at him. "Okay. I've never done this before," he admitted. "Not like this. Not with a guy." I kept telling myself I was just curious, or bored, or lonely. But this doesn't feel like any of that. My chest tightened, but not with fear, with recognition. "It doesn't have to mean everything all at once," I said. "It can just mean this." He nodded. "That's what I want. I just don't want to pretend it didn't happen." I reached up, brushing my thumb along his jaw. "You don't have to." We stayed like that longer than we meant to. Eventually, the reality of time crept back in. My flight was the next morning, something neither of us had said yet, but both of us were aware of. When I finally stood to leave, Tyler followed me upstairs and out to the back porch. The sun was setting again, painting everything in that soft, unreal light that makes promises feel heavier. "So," he said, hands in his pockets, "tomorrow." "Yeah," I said quietly. He looked at me, really looked at me. "This doesn't end tomorrow, does it?" I didn't lie. I don't want it to. Neither did he. And for the first time since I'd come home, the thought of leaving didn't just feel sad. It felt unfinished. The morning I left felt heavier than it should have. I woke up before my alarm, the early light spilling through the curtains of my old bedroom, dust floating in the air like it always had. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then everything rushed back in. Tyler's hands, his voice, the way he'd looked at me on the porch the night before like he was trying to memorize my face. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. "Tyler, you awake?" I stared at the screen for a second before answering. "Me? Yeah. Packing." 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then, "Tyler, come over before you go." I didn't hesitate. The house was quiet when I slipped out, the kind of quiet that makes every step feel louder than it is. Crossing the street that early felt surreal, like the world hadn't caught up to what was happening yet. Tyler answered the door almost immediately, like he'd been standing there waiting. He was wearing a hoodie, hair still messy from sleep, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He stepped aside to let me in, then closed the door behind me, but didn't lock it this time. That detail stuck with me. We didn't rush downstairs. Instead, we stood there in the entryway, close enough that I could feel his warmth, neither of us sure where to put the weight of the moment. "I don't do good with goodbyes," he said quietly. "Me neither." He nodded once, then pulled me into him. The hug was tighter than before, like he was anchoring himself. I buried my face into his shoulder, breathing him in, trying to commit the feeling to memory. "I don't want this to turn into something we don't talk about," he said, voice muffled against my hair. "Like it was never real." I pulled back just enough to look at him. "It was real." "I know," he said quickly. "I just mean, I don't want to lose it just because you're getting on a plane." My chest tightened. "I don't want that either." We moved to the couch, sitting close, knees touching. This time, there was an edge to the quiet. Not awkward, just aware. Time was finally doing what it always does, pressing in. "So what happens now?" Tyler asked. I thought about it carefully. "I go back to my life. You stay here. We don't pretend this weekend didn't happen." "And then?" he pressed. "And then we see if this holds up outside this street," I said. "Outside of nostalgia and timing." He studied me for a long moment. "You're not saying no?" "No," I said softly. "I'm saying I want to be honest about what it'll take." Tyler exhaled, leaning back, running a hand through his hair. "I've never wanted to try this hard for something before." That admission landed deep. "Neither have I," I said. He leaned in and kissed me. Not desperate, not rushed. Just steady, intentional. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine. "Call me when you land," he said. "I will." "And don't disappear," he added, half joking but not really. "I won't." When it was finally time, he walked me to the door again. Same porch, same street, completely different feeling. "Hey," he said as I stepped down. "This doesn't feel like an ending." I smiled, even though my eyes burned a little. "No, it really doesn't." We kissed one last time. Quick, restrained, loaded with everything we hadn't said yet. Then I crossed the street, turned once, and saw him still standing there, watching. On the plane, as the town shrank beneath the clouds, I realized something unexpected. Going home hadn't pulled me backward. It had quietly pointed me forward, toward something unfinished, uncertain, and very real. The first week after I got back felt unreal, like I'd imagined the whole thing during turbulence and cheap airplane coffee. My apartment was the same. My routine snapped back into place too easily. Work, gym, Late dinners eaten standing up because I forgot to sit down. If it weren't for my phone lighting up at exactly the wrong moments, I might have convinced myself that Tyler was just a really vivid memory, but he wasn't. Tyler. You land yet? Tyler. Tell me you're not dead. Tyler, I hate airports, and I wasn't even there. I smiled at my screen like an idiot, right there in baggage claim. We talked every day after that. Not constantly, not obsessively, but consistently. Morning messages, late night voice notes when one of us couldn't sleep. Updates that didn't need to be sent but were anyway, because we both wanted to stay threaded into each other's lives. At first, we kept it light, safer. But eventually, the harder conversations crept in. What does this make us? What happens if one of us freaks out? What if this only worked because it was temporary? Tyler was honest in a way that surprised me. He admitted when things scared him, when he felt like he was standing on unfamiliar ground without a map. I didn't try to rush him through it. I knew what it felt like to need time, and somehow, that made it stronger. 3 weeks after I left, he called me instead of texting. I've been thinking, he said, voice quieter than usual. I don't want this to just exist on my phone. My heart picked up. Okay, so I looked at flights. I sat down hard on my couch. You what? I can come out there next month, he said, just for a long weekend. No pressure, no expectations. I just want to see what this looks like in your world. For a second, I couldn't speak. The idea of Tyler in my space, my city, my life, felt terrifying and right all at once. I want that, I said finally. I really do. When he visited, it wasn't cinematic. No dramatic airport sprint, no swelling music. Just him walking through arrivals with a backpack slung over one shoulder, scanning the crowd until his eyes found mine. And then, that smile. The weekend wasn't perfect. We got on each other's nerves. We misread signals. We had a quiet argument on my couch about whether this was turning into something bigger than either of us was ready for. But we didn't shut down. We talked. We listened. We stayed. One night, lying side by side in the dark, Tyler whispered, I used to think wanting something this much meant losing control. I turned toward him. What do you think now? I think it means I finally stopped running. That was the moment it clicked for me, not as some dramatic realization, but as a calm certainty. This wasn't a detour. This wasn't nostalgia. This wasn't curiosity burning itself out. It was two people meeting each other honestly, later than expected, but right on time. We didn't define everything after that. We didn't need to. We just kept choosing each other, again and again, across distance, across doubt, across the quiet fear that comes with letting yourself care. And every time I go home now, the house across the street isn't just a memory anymore. It's where something real started.